The wrench slipped from her oil-stained fingers as laughter echoed across the motor pool. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez didn't look up from the engine block. Her sleeves rolled past her elbows. Dark streaks of grease painting her forearms like war paint. The Humvee's engine had seized again, the third breakdown this week. And while she worked in focused silence, a cluster of Marines leaned against the adjacent vehicle, their voices carrying on the desert wind. "Look at Vasquez, still playing in the dirt," Corporal Martinez called out, his voice thick with amusement. "Those hands are going to be black forever." "Maybe she should have joined the army," another voice joined in. "They love their grease monkeys. Over there." The metal was hot under her palms as she adjusted her grip on the torque wrench. Elena had heard worse. She'd been hearing worse for 3 years, ever since she'd arrived at Camp Pendleton, with calloused hands and a reputation that preceded her. The mechanic who could fix anything, but somehow never quite fit anywhere. The laughter didn't sting anymore. It was background noise, like the constant hum of generators or the distant crack of rifle fire from the training ranges. But then the formation whistle cut through the afternoon heat like a blade. The laughter died instantly. Boots shuffled against gravel as the Marines straightened, their casual mockery evaporating into military precision. Elena wiped her hands on her utilities, the fabric already stained beyond redemption, and moved to fall in with the others. But before she could take her usual place in the back ranks, a voice stopped her cold. "Vasquez!" Front and center. The command came from Captain Rodriguez, his weathered face unreadable as he emerged from the administrative building. Elena felt every pair of eyes burning into her back as she stepped forward, her boots crunching on the desert stones. The same Marines who had been laughing moments before now watched in silence, confusion replacing their earlier amusement. She had always been invisible in the way that useful things often are, present when needed, forgotten when not. Before this moment, before this inexplicable summons, Elena Vasquez had existed in the margins of military life. Her days began before dawn in the motor pool, surrounded by the familiar symphony of engines and hydraulics, tools, and troubleshooting, while other Marines prepared for patrols or training exercises. She prepared their vehicles, ensuring every bolt was tight, every fluid topped off, every system functioning. The work was honest and necessary, but it carried no glory. No one wrote commendations for a perfectly maintained transmission or a flawlessly executed brake replacement. Her performance reviews were adequate, her promotion timeline standard, her presence largely unremarked upon. She lived in base housing that felt more like a waiting room than a home, where bills accumulated on a small table by the door, and phone calls from her mother back in San Antonio grew increasingly concerned about when Eleanor might find a real career. The weight of ordinary struggle pressed down on her shoulders every evening as she walked back from the motor pool, her hands scrubbed raw, but still bearing traces of the day's work under her fingernails. Other Marines gathered in the common areas, sharing stories of training victories or weekend adventures, but Eleanor usually retreated to her quarters, where she would sit at her small desk and study maintenance manuals by lamplight, always seeking to master something new, to become indispensable in ways that mattered. She carried her father's legacy without ever speaking of it, a ghost that lived in the creases of a folded flag stored in her closet. In the faded photograph tucked inside her wallet, Master Sergeant Miguel Vasquez had died in Afghanistan when Elena was 17, leaving behind a medal collection she'd never seen displayed and a reputation she'd never felt worthy of inheriting. His bronze star sat in a box she rarely opened, alongside a letter he'd written to her, but never sent, found among his personal effects by his commanding officer. Miha, the letter had read in her father's careful handwriting. Respect is never given freely. You earn it or you seize it. But remember, true leadership isn't about commanding others. It's about commanding yourself first. She had memorized those words, carried them through mechanic school, through boot camp, through every moment of doubt and dismissal. Her father's service patch, a small piece of fabric bearing the insignia of his unit, remained pinned inside her utility jacket, invisible to others, but constant against her ribs, a reminder of standards she felt she'd never quite reached. The memory of his funeral still visited her in quiet moments. The precision of the honor guard, the weight of the flag as it was placed in her mother's trembling hands, the way strangers approached them afterward to share stories of Miguel Vasquez's courage, his leadership, his ability to inspire confidence in the darkest moments. Elena had listened to those stories and wondered if greatness was something that could be inherited, or if it died with the person who possessed it. Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through her memories like a knife through steel. Vasquez, you're being reassigned. Effective immediately, you'll be acting as liaison between motor pool operations and field command. His words hung in the desert air, impossible and immediate. Lieutenant Walsh is out on medical leave. You'll be filling his position. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena felt the earth shift beneath her boots, not from any physical tremor, but from the sudden realignment of everything she thought she understood about her place in this world. The Marines who had been mocking her greasy hands minutes earlier now stared with a mixture of confusion and something approaching. Concern, sir. Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. I'm not sure I understand. You'll be briefed at 0800 tomorrow. Report to Major Harrison. Rodriguez's tone brooked no argument, no questions, no hesitation. Dismissed. As the formation broke apart, Elena caught fragments of whispered conversations that followed her like shadows. The news spread through the base with the velocity of wildfire, each retelling adding new layers of speculation and rumor. In the mess hall that evening, conversations died when she approached, only to resume in hushed tones after she passed. I heard her father was some kind of war hero. Someone murmured from a nearby table. My buddy in admin says there's more to her file than anyone knew. Another voice added, she's got connections. Has to be. Nobody goes from wrench turner to liaison overnight. The whispers followed her everywhere. To the peaks, to the rec center, to the laundry facility. Elena found herself caught between resentment and bewilderment, uncertain whether the attention she'd craved for so long was worth the suspicion that came with it. The Marines who had once ignored her now watched her every move, searching for signs of favoritism, for evidence that her sudden elevation was undeserved. The sabotage started small. Tools that went missing from her workstation, maintenance. Schedules that mysteriously changed without notification. Supply requisitions that somehow got lost in processing. Elena recognized the pattern. The way jealousy manifested in 1,000 tiny cuts, designed to prove she didn't belong in her new role. Corporal Martinez, who had led the laughter that afternoon in the motor pool, now made a point of questioning her decisions in front of others. You sure about that talk specification, Vasquez? Wouldn't want to be responsible if something goes wrong. His words carried just enough doubt to plant seeds of uncertainty in anyone listening. Elena absorbed each slight, each challenge, each whispered criticism. She had expected resistance, but the depth of resentment surprised her. She began to understand that earning respect through competence was different from earning it through authority, and that the gap between the two could feel insurmountable. The crisis came without warning, as they always do. Elena was reviewing maintenance logs in the motor pool office when the emergency klaxon shattered the morning quiet. Through the window, she watched Marines running toward the assembly area, their movements sharp with urgency. The radio crackled to life, with reports of a training exercise gone wrong. A vehicle convoy, trapped by simulated enemy fire, their communication systems failing, their position compromised. Major Harrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Vasquez, you're up. Get those vehicles moving and get our people out." This was the moment she had trained for, without knowing it, prepared. For 3 years of understanding engines and electronics, systems, and solutions. But as Elena stepped into the command vehicle, surrounded by Marines who had spent weeks questioning her qualifications, she felt the weight of their skeptical stares pressing down on her shoulders. The radio reports painted a grim picture. 3 vehicles disabled, communication sporadic, simulated casualties mounting. The exercise had become too real, too dangerous, and the traditional solutions weren't working. Elena studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities, her hands steady on the radio despite the tremor she felt in her chest. "This is Vasquez. All units, switch to backup frequency and report status." Her voice carried across the airwaves with an authority she'd never heard from herself before. The responses came back fragmented, but clear enough to build a picture. Elena's years in the motor pool had taught her to diagnose problems from incomplete information, to find solutions when systems failed. Now she applied that same methodical approach to human beings and tactical situations. Unit 2, your transmission issue isn't mechanical. It's your driver over-revving under stress. Drop to first gear and maintain steady throttle. Her instructions were precise, confident, born from understanding how machines and people failed under pressure. Unit 3, your communication blackout is environmental, not equipment failure. Move 200 meters north and try again, one by one. Elena guided the trapped Marines through solutions that combined technical knowledge with tactical awareness. She saw patterns that others missed, connections between mechanical failures and human errors, between individual problems and systemic solutions. When the last vehicle reached safety and the exercise was declared complete, the silence in the command vehicle was profound. Elena set down the radio handset and turned to face the Marines who had watched her work. Their expressions had changed, no longer skeptical, no longer dismissive, but carrying something heavier and more complex. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the motor pool as Elena returned to her makeshift office. The same Marines, who had laughed at her greasy hands, now stood at attention as she passed, their silence more powerful than any words they might have spoken. She didn't acknowledge their salutes with satisfaction or triumph. Instead, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, like her father's service patch against her ribs. Invisible to others, constant and heavy. Elena picked up the maintenance log she had been reviewing hours earlier, before the world shifted beneath her feet. Her hands, still stained with grease despite repeated washing, turned the pages with steady precision. She had not set out to prove anyone wrong. She had simply done what needed to be done, applied what she knew, led from where she stood. Outside the window, the motor pool continued its eternal rhythm of maintenance and preparation. Engines hummed, tools clinked against metal. Marines called out technical specifications and supply requests. But something fundamental had changed. In the space between mockery and respect, between doubt and certainty, Elena Vasquez closed the log and prepared for tomorrow's briefing, carrying the weight of command in hands that would never be entirely clean, leading Marines who would never again mistake competence for weakness, or leadership for anything other than the quiet courage to act when action was required.